I was this morning, I've got this week, I've got a course with the center in India. So it's like at 7:30 in the morning and then 9:30 at night, because they're 12 hours ahead. So the timing is really weird, you know. So we're talking about death. And of course, there's detailed descriptions of death, especially in Tibetan Buddhism. They've got so this book is Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book, How to Face Death Without Fear. We're using that as our basis. So really, it's a handbook. And it's kind of interesting because it's, it's all about how to help your loved ones and obviously help yourself as well. And the key point, of course, in Buddhism is that the long-term point is to die well so that you get another decent human rebirth so you can keep on moving on your spiritual path. But I mean, let's just talk about this, not even that, but let's just talk about what that implies, which is that we all live in fear of death. We can't stand the thought of death, Even if we're Buddhists and we know all about impermanence, Buddha tells us about impermanence from day one. I tell you, it's something really common in Buddhism. And because Buddhism has this view that your consciousness comes from before and will continue, it's a bigger picture, But still, it's so interesting to look at how we can't stand change. I mean, we love change when it's good, but we can't stand when good things change into bad. So let's look at that, and because this is pointing really to the key Buddhist approach to why we suffer and why we're happy. We, of course, think it's because the beautiful grandma's beautiful antique cup broke. So naturally we are sad, we think, because it broke. But basically, no, Buddha's always saying, yeah, the cup broke, and it's true, it was a lovely cup. But the real reason we suffer is because we have this deep assumption that it shouldn't break. This is the point that Buddha's making across the board, that it's what goes on in our mind that is the main source of whether we're happy or suffering. It's a really simple statement. And in a sense, we kind of understand it. We know perfectly well one day you wake up and everything's bad out there. The weather's terrible, the coffees taste ugly, everything's wrong, but somehow your mind's okay. You feel kind of content. Another day, you can have the most perfect day in the universe and you're miserable. We kind of know that, but I think we don't join the dots. We just kind of think it's an accident. But this is telling us exactly the point, So it's really quite simple to say, practicing Buddhism, the essence of it, the absolute essence, the fundamental job is to see what's going on in your mind and then to adjust what's there, And that seems very mysterious to us, to adjust your mind. What do you mean by adjust your mind? The weather's horrible. What do you mean, adjust my mind? The weather should change, not me. And that's because we're so addicted to believing that it is the outside that is the main cause of the suffering and the happiness. We really do believe that it's grandma's antique cup breaking that is the reason, the logical reason why we're suffering. That appears to us that way. We believe it, and we keep buying into it. But we also know, just like I said before, that if it's true that the outside is the main cause of our happiness and suffering, then that day that you wake up, when even though your mind, when everything's miserable out there, your mind would automatically be miserable. And if you wake up that day, and you've had a fight with your boyfriend, but the weather's beautiful, the logic is that you'd be happy. But we know it's not true. So that tells us right there that it's what goes on in our mind. But we don't join the dots. We don't really get the learning from it. And it's really quite profound, because we totally believe, especially when really bad things happen. I mean, it's understandable to have pain and despair when your beloved dies. There's no question. Even when your pet dies, not even, but we love our pet sometimes more than our hubby. We understand it, but we don't look deeply enough at the logic of it all. That's really the Buddhist approach to it, And then you say, well, what's wrong with being sad? Why aren't I allowed to be sad? Can't I be, grief-stricken? It's not a question of that. It's the really most fundamental point also that Buddha's making. It's not a moralistic issue that you shouldn't be unhappy, you shouldn't be angry, you shouldn't be jealous. It's not a question of that. It's something so simple, again, that we miss it. And it's really hard to see this one. And that is when we look into our mind. In other words, do your own survey and check the last time you were jealous, angry, anxious, depressed. I mean, join the universe here. Check how you felt. Don't worry about the outside, but just check how you felt. It was really miserable, wasn't it? I mean, it's sort of obvious. You don't say, oh, Robina, I was depressed yesterday. It was just great. I mean, you would laugh. It's so evident. It's so logical to us. So then that's the point that Buddha's making. Hey, don't go further, he says. Look at that point. Now check the last time that you were kind of, you were generous or loving or compassionate. Your mind was spacious. Check it. Look at the logic. This is not religion. This is not moralistic. Check how you felt. You felt good. And this is one of the key things that Buddha's making before you get any further. If we could really understand that anger is painful, don't worry about, see that, but our trouble is we know it's painful, but our analysis is wrong. Our analysis says, yes, I know I'm angry, but we totally 100, or let's say depressed because your beloved died. Let's say something like that. No, forget it. Just grandma's cup will do. Don't worry about it. But of course I'm upset, we'll say, because grandma's cup broke. So we are so convinced, this is the point, we are so convinced that it's the grandma's cup breaking that is the thing that caused the sadness. That even though we know, or let's say guilt, let's say it was guilt because you broke it, or something like that, some unhappy feeling. We know it's guilt, we know it's depression, we know it's sadness, we know it's anger. Don't forget sadness. We know it, but we sort of say, but there's a reason for it. It's not my fault. It's because the cup broke. Of course I'm angry. It's not my fault. Look at what my husband did. So we sort of like, ego wants to get off the hook. Ego wants to feel that, that it's because of that outside thing. Look at what happened to me. Look at what happened to me. Look at what happened to me. That's why I'm angry. So therefore it's impossible for us to simply look at the anger, because it feels like it's to say that you're suffering because you're angry or because you're grasping at things as permanent, which is what Buddha's telling us, that we hear it as blame. We hear it as Buddha saying, well, you mean it's my fault? And that's because we've got all these assumptions deep in our bones. That's why we have to unpack all this. There's so many assumptions we have in our mind about what suffering is and what happens and why it is and what this and why that and blah, blah, blah. When they're very set in stone. So Buddha view comes along and it's really quite a different analysis. It really takes a lot of patience and a lot of humility to really look carefully at what he's saying, Because it's not the view we have. We have this very instinctive view that we totally believe in, that we've been believing in since God knows when. I mean, the Buddha says, don't blame your Catholic mummy, your Jewish mummy for your guilt. That's because it's a function of the way the mind works. It's a function of the way ego works. Buddha's analysis of the mind is really quite intricate, But that just takes time to see. And this is where I talk, these extreme examples I use. It's always good to look at extreme examples. Like this woman I always quote about, a woman called Sunny, who's old, lives in Ireland now, and she was on death row for years because she was accused with her husband of killing 2 policemen in Florida back in the 70s. She's totally innocent. She didn't do a thing. She's this hippie hitching with her husband, and she gets accused of murdering 2 policemen. And the husband even gets executed in prison. Unbelievable. She was there 17 years. So that you'd think, forget about your cup breaking, forget about your husband being mean to you. My God, you would think that's the most perfect, logical reason for anybody to be out of their brain with despair and, in fact, go mad. I know many people in prison wrongly accused. It's not uncommon. There's so many organizations in this country working for people who are innocent, trying to get them out. It's just so tragic. You can't bear it. So because that feels so immutable, you can't move out of that prison. Nobody's believing your words. Everybody believes that you're guilty. The husband even got executed. And she went to the execution, and apparently his head burst into flames. I mean, it's like medieval days, You can't imagine the torture, the nightmare for her. She lived for years in a solitary cell with a Bible. She was Jewish, they gave her this Bible. So it's every reason, naturally, without analysis, without awareness, without thinking about it, that's the perfect scenario to go completely mad. There's no question about it. The nightmare, when you're completely innocent. You can't even imagine it. Yet, she wasn't a Buddhist. She's not a Buddhist. She's like this hippie. She's now old. It's an old hippie. But she's not. She's a wonderful spiritual human being who just seemed, whatever reason, you can describe karma or whatever, had this extremely, I would say, emotionally intelligent mind, which also means she didn't have much anger. This is very interesting. So this unbearable nightmare that was utterly immutable. Even if your husband's mean, he's not locking you in. You could walk out any day. But she could not walk out. It was like the most immutable thing you could find. But she said, I knew I had a choice. About to change her mind. She said, at some point, I finally realized I couldn't change anything, but they couldn't take my mind from me. I mean, this is so astonishing. I mean, my sister just recently sent me something about some lady in Auschwitz who are exactly the same. Exactly the same words, you know, exactly the same words. You hear these exceptional people, but we think they're exceptions to the rule. We don't get it, you know. You'd think it'd be a revelation to us. You think we'd go, oh my God, you mean I can change my mind? You mean I can become happy? But we don't. We just think, oh, they're exceptions. Oh yeah, that's just them. They're saints. I'm normal and I just want to get angry, you know, or whatever. Or I don't think I have a choice. That's the tragedy. We don't think we have a choice. And this is very deeply in our mind. It's very deeply programmed in us. So whatever reason, Sunny had this incredible ability. They couldn't take my mind from me. I knew I had a choice. So she literally did this intensely hard work in the beginning in the cell, going out of her brain, you know, working on her mind, learning to change her mind, learning to stop being angry, learning to stop being enraged, learning to change. She used yoga and things. I mean, that takes unbelievable will and incredible courage. Think about it. On her own, nobody to turn to. The whole world thinking she's a monster. Husband dead. Well, that was after a few years he got executed. I had a choice, she said. I mean, that for me is just but what happens is we hear about people like that. We praise people like that, but we don't think, wow, perhaps I can do it. No. It shows us how entrenched these Buddhists calling them misconceptions. The misconception that things don't change. The misconception that things are set in stone. The misconception that the outside world is the cause of my suffering and my happiness. The misconception that I'm hopeless, or whatever it is we have. All these deeply held assumptions. So we've got to become conscious, you know, of our mind. I mean, Lama Zopa says, and I say this quite often, and it sounds very shocking. We can't believe it initially. The vast majority of all the humans on the planet, and we're talking about the really super intelligent ones as well, have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their lives. And what that means is we give all the power to the outside. Absolutely, totally give the power to the outside. And I'm this innocent victim to whom good things and bad things happen, and we don't know the reason. And whatever goes on in here, it doesn't. I know I'm angry. I know I'm jealous. I know that's there, but I don't realize that that's what's playing a role. I don't realize that that's what's affecting what I'm experiencing. We think it's all the outside. That really is quite suffering. That point alone is deep mental suffering. It's enough to have incredible compassion for other people. But first we have to see it in ourselves, you know. And again, it's not moralistic. It's not like, oh, you shouldn't be angry. Not like that. Buddhists say, honey, look at the heartbreak anger is. Look how it harms you. That's the point. It should be giving us compassion for ourselves. We shouldn't hear it as moralistic. You shouldn't be this. But then the other problem is, the big problem, I think, is our analysis in modern psychology of these different states of mind. It's very, very different from the Buddhist one. It takes us time to really hear the Buddhist one, you know. So, for example, as often I mention, Buddha's analysis of the mind, he divides all the contents of our mind into 3 categories. All the contents of our thoughts and feelings and emotions into negative, neurotic, I-based, fear-based, miserable, disturbing, distressing, nightmare states of mind. Attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, and the rest. And the virtuous ones, the good ones, the spacious ones, love, compassion, kindness, joy, you name it, you name it. We know these words intimately, but we give them all equal status, though, don't we? In our culture, we give equal status to these. In other words, a normal person in our psychological models, our neuroscientific models, a normal person has a little bit of all of these. In fact, that means you'd be totally weird if you didn't have anger, if you didn't have jealousy, if you didn't have anxiety. In other words, if we read about Sunny, it doesn't fit with our view of a normal person. So we just kind of put her up on a pedestal. Wow, isn't she amazing? And that's why it's quite hard to first initially hear the Buddha's essential view, which is indicated by this word Buddha, the end result of all this hard work, following Buddha's methodology, is to eventually rid the mind of all the rubbish completely, rid the mind of all anxiety, all attachment, all fears, all jealousy. That's extreme for us. That's plain weird. And to develop to perfection all the goodness. That just sounds very peculiar. And that's why it's so interesting that, you know, the Dalai Lama is said to be a Buddha. I mean, all the Tibetan Buddhists would say, the Tibetans would say he's a Buddha. He's a fully enlightened being. That means he has done the job of ridding his mind of all the rubbish. That means there's not one atom of attachment or ego grasping or jealousy or despair or all those things. And so that makes us feel he must be kind of superhuman or abnormal. So it's sort of interesting. His Holiness, I mean, Tibetans understand it because that's just their culture. But for us modern people, we think, oh, he's, the God King, all these words we use, kind of stick him up on this pedestal. So it's almost like His Holiness spends his time trying to be ordinary, just to make us feel better, He talks about joking about he's angry and he gets upset at things. He just has, because Tibetans understand what it means to be to be a Buddha and then to manifest as a human being for the benefit of others, which is he is. They understand, they don't kind of get all over ridiculous, but we kind of think we're looking all the time for his godlike behavior. Why doesn't he show all this magic, So he's kind of all the time acting ordinary, trying to be ordinary. So it's so interesting. One time, the Tibetans, the very strong emphasis in the Mahayana path is, the more highly realized you become, the less deluded, the more advanced you become, the more you get wisdom, the more you get compassion, the more ordinary you appear. The humility is really powerful, and it's really important not to be arrogant and not to sort of, it's to be hidden, in other words. So you never really recognize what a holy being is, because they're just going to be walking around looking like a humble, ordinary person. So there's always, when they teach these lamas, they never talk about their own experiences, because that's arrogance. Now that's weird for us, because we love to talk about our experiences. But they never do. They always quote the yogi this and the yogi that and the yogi this. And then when you ask the lama, well, what about this and what about that? Do you have that experience? They say, oh, no, I don't know anything. I don't know anything. But but all the Tibetans understand that they're just being humble. They kind of understand that, but we don't understand it. So at one time it backfired for His Holiness. In Wisconsin years ago, there was a center there where Geshe Sopa used to teach. His Holiness sent him to America in the 60s, and he was the professor at the university there, and then he started a center, and then the Kala Chakra initiation was there years ago. Anyway, this I don't know anything backfired, and one man in the audience was in tears, and he said, well, if you don't know anything, what chance do we have? Which is a really good point, because we don't understand I don't know anything. So he kind of then backtracked a bit, and he said, well, I do know a few things. It was so sweet. And then at that meeting, he quoted an experience. He told the people an experience he had when he went to India for the first time in 1956, which was to celebrate the 2500th anniversary of the Buddha's enlightenment or birth or whatever. And he said he had a memory of being at a teaching in a big, big crowd, at the back of a crowd. He said it was at the back of a crowd of a very big teaching by the Buddha. He had a memory of it. It was so sweet to say that, just to sort of give us a little bit of courage. It was very funny. And now I've noticed in my observation, when he teaches, when there are always modern people around, he teaches in a very different way. He brings himself into it. He quotes, when I was 15, I got a bit of a realization of that. And when I was 17, and I really began to understand that he talks that way, which is not how they normally talk. That's for our benefit. He talks like a very ordinary person. It's very wonderful. I don't know why I started telling you about that, but it's a nice story. Oh, yes, that you can't imagine a person having no delusions. So he has to go out of his way to look like he's got delusions, because we think he's weird if he doesn't. But it's sort of fairly evident. I mean, if you think about, talk about Sunny, but look at the Dalai Lama, like 70 years. He was appointed to be, he took on the job of running Tibet at the age of 15 when all the dramas started. 15 years old, can you imagine? So that means he's now like 89, I think. Wait a minute, what is he? No, 86 or something. Well, he's now something like 86. And I think it's like, in other words, for 70 years, 71 years, he hasn't stopped trying to make it better in Tibet. In other words, normally, there's Sunny on death row. Well, there's Dalai Lama, the boss of Tibet and 6 million people. Look at the nightmare. It hasn't stopped for 70 years. These Chinese communists coming in and rampaging through the whole country, killing more than 1 million Tibetans, still doing it, imprisoning. There's no real monasticism. They've got the monasteries there, but it's all just kind of pretend, because the government completely runs everything. Every day Tibetans are coming out of exile, into exile, coming to Dharamsala. Every single day now, hasn't stopped. But he's never stopped for those 70 years being optimistic, being buoyant, being persevering, patient. not getting angry, not getting depressed, not getting anxious, never stopping trying to find ways, diplomatically, socially, politically, religiously, in every way possible. Meanwhile, also benefiting the world, to all these incredible talks with scientists, these amazing talks with other religions. He never stops. And you even see him now, and you hear him. He's a funny, relaxed person. So, I mean, the thing is, we should ask the question, oh, well, that's interesting. Perhaps I could try to be like that in my little sad life, you know. But we don't join the dots. So that's what happens. We put him on a pedestal. Oh, that's just a Dalai Lama. Well, excuse me, that's rude. You know, that's like when you want to play tennis, and you go to play tennis and you're learning from Federer, and you just keep saying, oh, look, that's just Federer. That's just Federer. I can't do that. No, I can't do that. But Federer's showing you what you can become. That's why you go to play tennis. So Dalai Lama's showing us what we can become. We should join the dots, learn from it. Well, if he can be like this in the face of that amount of nightmare for 70 years, perhaps I can try to find out what methods he did so I can try them. That's proof of the pudding, you know. It's very encouraging. But we don't get it. And that's why, even though we Buddhists, let's say you've been hearing about this for 40 years, and you hear about the Dalai Lama, all this suffering, and learning to forgive, and learning all this, and then your boyfriend, and you're Buddhist for 40 years, and your boyfriend is mean to you, or the center director is unkind, and you start buying into all the stories. She's so mean. She did this. She did that. We forget all the teachings. It just goes out the window, and we see it as self-existent. We see it as real. It's not fair. Poor me. We forget all the teachings. We forget because it's so hard to practice. It's so easy to say the words, but oh my goodness, to put it into practice is intense, you know. It's every second of the day we've got to practice, not just occasionally. Things are imperfect. Every word Buddha says, basically Buddha's teachings. I mean, basically, you know, what's music teachings? You know, if you go to someone and study music, every word that she says, she's not just spouting ideas out of her head. She's telling you advice of how you can play piano. Every word in that teaching from your teacher, your music teacher, every word she says is advice. You hear it as advice. That's powerful. The same with Buddha. So every word Buddha says, every word in all the Buddha's teachings, which is why you should check up on the teachers, because some can be a bunch of peanuts. Every word in the books, every word hearing from the mouth of the teacher is advice. So to hear it as advice, not just, oh, isn't that interesting? It's pretty powerful. Let me try that one. Let me try that. So that's why I say, even after this one little hour, even there's just 1% of something that you heard, that you can go, what a good idea. I'll try that. That's brilliant, you know. That's why Lama Yeshe was always very cynical about becoming too intellectually, for us modern people, us Westerners, let's say, because we're all intellectually very brilliant. We really train our intellects to an incredible degree. And because we're very interested in ideas, we can easily hear Buddhism, because Buddhism is very extensive in its philosophy and its metaphysics and psychology and epistemology and all the rest. There's a massive body of knowledge there. I mean, they study it for like 20, 30 years in the Tibetan Buddhist monastic university system. So because we're so brilliant intellectually, we can get very captivated by all that. And we can forget to put our money where our mouth is. We forget to put it into practice, you know. It's very compelling to do that because we're very intelligent. So Lama would always be very cynical about becoming too much of he said, I've noticed every time someone becomes even a translator, you get very intellectual, very then you argue with all the other translators and get too intellectual about the tiny meanings of things. We forget to practice. Which doesn't mean you chuck the baby out with the bathwater and don't get intellectual knowledge. You need the knowledge because that's what you put into practice. But it's to never forget that every word, which is intellectual, words are intellectual, it's advice. Like if you started listening to cooking recipes and you read every recipe book and learned all the recipes, but you sort of forgot to make cakes, people would think you're a fraud. But unfortunately, that's how we think about philosophy, isn't it, in our culture? You're not supposed to become too subjective. You're supposed to have this objectivity and look at and think of all these clever things about the world. No, you've got to put it into practice. Otherwise, you're just a phony, you know. So hearing it as advice, and it demands masses of hard work. Looking into our mind, listening to the assumptions, the conceptual stories that inform the feelings. This is something that too in our culture, we're very addicted to feelings. We only notice what's going on in our mind when it becomes a feeling and when the body is involved. But that's why we need concentration meditation, so we can start to listen beneath the feelings. We can listen to the conceptual stories, the elaborate script that these delusions are saying deep down. That's where we start to see the assumptions. That's where we start to change. We question our assumptions and change them. It's hard work. It's intense hard work. But that's the method, becoming a happy, marvelous person. And then that's the method for helping others. Anyway, chatting away here. What about some questions, you people? Any old question, I don't mind. Any questions? Nothing? Yes, sweetheart. Yes, Barbara.
Hi, Venerable Robina. Thank you.
Good, sweetheart.
When saying mantras, I'm not sure where my mind should be. If I should just be like focusing on the sound, or if I should be thinking something else. I'm just unsure about that. And then
that's a very interesting question. And there's many approaches to it, Barbara. There's many approaches. So first of all, it's like doing, saying mantras is one way of saying it is it's like being at the gym and you're on the machine for 20 minutes. You're training your muscles, aren't you? And so while you're training your muscles, you can be watching the television on your little machine. You could be doing something else, right? You can't, because the work is still happening, isn't it? You with me? So you could argue there's one way. For example, we do different retreats of certain Buddhas, and they usually quantify the length of the retreat in terms of the number of mantras. It's just the way they've developed. So often we do a retreat and you do 100,000 mantras. So depending on how long it is, it might take you a month, it might take you 3 months, depending on the mantra, depending on the practice. So there's one approach is you're doing the mantra, and even without awareness, because of the Vajrayana explanation of the relationship between mind and the subtle physical energy, which is the prana, the wind energy in our body, the mind, just saying mantra, it's purifying your mind just naturally. It's naturally purifying your mind and just naturally purifying the wind energies, which is purifying you physically. So you could even argue that's like going to the gym. You can be happily. So one of the examples is the lamas would say, while you're doing your mantra recitation for like an hour every session, you're kind of accumulating your mantras. One approach is you could be then thinking about impermanence, think about karma, think about the different points of the Lam Rim. You could easily do that. That's one approach. Now, another one is if you're using it to help you get concentration, you would simply concentrate on the sound. Another one is you might even just say it in your mind and it would help you stay focused. So there's many approaches to it, Barbara. Another, you can just have it you can do it while you're washing the dishes. You can do it while you're on the toilet. You can do it like if you're driving, like say you're feeling your mind all agitated and you're angry about your husband or something. You just say mantras. You put mantra on top and it kind of calms it. And it's there in the background in your mind. It's very beneficial. There's many approaches because it is such power in these sounds. And because of the relationship between the mind and the physical energies, it's already purifying you just by the doing of it. Do you hear me?
Even if I'm not thinking about purifying.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Even you can say that because the very sound itself, you see, in the Vajrayana model, sound is logical because the universe is made of the 4 elements according to this model of the universe: earth, air, fire, water. So sound is air. If there's a vacuum, there's no sound. Sound is the wind energy inside us. So speech is the air energy. So the most pure sound is the Sanskrit sounds, they say. That's what they say. So just by saying them, you're purifying your wind energies just physically, naturally. And by saying it and you're buying into the meaning of it, it's love and compassion, or mani padme hung, let's say, then you have the heart, you want the love and compassion. It's already purifying your mind. But of course, the more you go into that and the more you focus on it, the deeper it will be. But there's other things you can do too. There's still benefit. You hear me?
I do hear you. And then what about a prayer wheel, using a prayer wheel?
And this is based upon the whole thing of the universe made of the 4 elements. And then the Buddhists feel about the mind, that the mind, everything we do with our mind has a result. And then because the mind and the wind energies are connected, and then including the external energy, then so what a prayer wheel is, I mean, it's just a convention made up by somebody way back when, but everything is like that. Everything's made up by us, and then we give it meaning. So there's mantra, there's Sanskrit syllables on that paper, and they would say all the elements, every time the elements are involved in anything, it affects the world. So having prayer flags with Sanskrit syllables on the prayers, on the cloth, and it's flapping in the wind. The wind, anybody, Lama Zopa would say, anybody who is affected by that wind. You put mantras in the water. Anybody who's affected by that water is blessed by that. So you've got to think about this, because it sounds a bit esoteric for us in the ordinary world, but it's the relationship between the internal and the external. It goes from the grossest to the most subtle level. So everything has some effect, you know. Do you understand?
I do. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You've got to think about the meaning, not just be superstitious about it. Think about the meaning. Because everything we think and do and say, and everything related to the physical elements, they're all connected. Do you understand? Astrology is based on that concept, I think. And all this concept of feng shui is based on that concept. And Tibetans have a similar system, you know. It's just looking at energy at a more subtle level. Do you understand? Yeah.
Thank you, Venerable Robina.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you. So helpful.
Venerable Robina, it's Joanne.
Yes, Joanne.
I have one question that's been on my mind. I don't know if it's totally related to what we're talking about, but you've talked a lot about the I, that there is no inherent, intrinsic, permanent I. And I'm beginning to understand that a little bit more as far as dependent arising is concerned. Good. But then you always end by saying, but there is an I.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if
okay. Okay, darling, let's talk about it a little bit. Yes, okay. There's this teaching of the Buddhas that is the best framework to use to understand this business of emptiness, and that's the two truths, which means there is conventional truth. Just means reality, facts. So there's conventionality. There's a convention. Okay, the universe consists of trillions and trillions of things. Just think simple. There's, you know, cups and saucers and chairs and plates and people and dogs and anger and love. Each of those is a phenomenon. Do you understand that each is a phenomenon? So each phenomenon, one way of putting this, each phenomenon that does exist, already we're stating it, exists both conventionally, has a conventional function, but also has an ultimate way of existing. So our tendency is, when we hear the words you were saying were correct, that the self, or it could be the same as anything else, a light, a chair, a toilet, a self, has no intrinsic characteristic, has no intrinsic, independent, inherent nature. So we need to analyze those words, because they've got a very particular meaning in Buddhism, and we don't quite get them, because the Buddha is telling us that the root delusion in our mind, the primordial ego grasping, call that colloquially, the primordial delusion is totally believing that everything does have an inherent nature. Now, we don't know we think that, because it's so deep. It's just an assumption deep in the bones of our being. So Buddha has discovered that we have this mistake, and he has discovered his own self. That's what the point is, that things don't exist like that. So we don't even know, we never thought. I mean, in other words, Buddha's telling us nothing has an intrinsic nature. And we'll go, well, excuse me, why are you telling me? It's because he says, because honey, you think there is an intrinsic nature, but it's so subtle, we don't even see it. So when we hear that nothing has an intrinsic nature, we can't help but hear, therefore there's nothing. We throw the baby out with the bathwater. We say, therefore there is no self, there is no toilet, there is no light. We become nihilistic. Do you understand? We can't help but hear it like that. So we think, oh, therefore there is nothing, therefore nothing matters, and we become nihilistic. Well, that's the worst mistake. Tsongkhapa talks about falling into the abyss of the great mistake. It's more nuanced and more subtle than that. So that's why it's important to understand there is something conventionally, but there's nothing ultimately. Of course, that's abstract for us, so we have to learn the meaning. So one really nice way Lama Zopa puts it when we've realized that there's no independent self, when we've realized there's no intrinsic self, when we've really realized that, it's as if there is no self. But he says that's ultimately, but conventionally there is a self. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't exist. So it's a really kind of seems like a tricky way of saying it, but it's to ensure that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. These two extremes, you see the two extreme views, Buddha calls them that. We either have the view that there's a real, solid, definite, concrete me, which is the view of eternalism, the view of permanence. That's one mistake we make. And then the other mistake we make is there's nothing. So we go between these two extremes. There's absolutely something or there's absolutely nothing. The meaning of emptiness and dependent arising, because dependent arising is the shorthand for conventional truth. Emptiness is the shorthand for ultimate truth. The reality is it's not nihilism. Emptiness isn't nihilism. Emptiness doesn't deny reality. And saying something is existing doesn't deny that it's empty of intrinsic nature. So it's putting these two together. It just means more thinking, more analyzing, and more looking into it and understanding the use of the words and then getting an experience from meditation of it. Will that sounds okay? Some food for thought there?
Yes, always food for thought. Could you then say that the I is dynamic? That there is the I, but it's dynamic, it's not static?
You could say that. It's a good way of putting it, yes. But it's very subtle.
Yeah.
See, when we also understand, another way to look into it, again, the way Lama Zopa says it, all these delusions, these misconceptions, these nonsense in our mind that are all rooted in the root delusion that believes in the intrinsic things, all these delusions, their job is to decorate on top of what is there, layers upon layers upon layers of characteristics that just aren't there. So the job of quote unquote understanding emptiness is peeling away the projections, peeling away the misconceptions in the mind to the point where when you finally realize the reality that there's no intrinsic I, it's as if there's no I, because it's so subtle. But then you look at conventional way of putting that, there is an I, but what does exist is so subtle, it's as if there's no I. It's a really tasty way of putting it. So you keep removing the misconceptions, removing ever more, removing the veils, removing the lies, removing the misconceptions, but not getting to the point where you say, oh, there's nothing. That's chucking the baby out with the bathwater, and not getting to the experience, oh, well, there is something, and concrete, grasping. We're counteracting these two truths. And finally, when you've understood these, they are both different ways of saying the same thing. Because when you understand that something is dependent, you realize it's not independent. And when you understand that something lacks independence, you realize it has interdependence. So that these two actually refer to the same thing. Okay?
Yes,
Good.
thank you. Thank
Good.
you very much.
Thank you so much, Joanne. So what else, people?
Venerable Robina, may I ask a question, please?
Absolutely.
Okay, this is Rachel, and I can't turn on my video because I work in a clinic and for privacy reasons, but I wanted to go back to the wind and using the breath being powerful. Could you please explain to me in a way that I could explain to a 6-year-old why you should not blow out a candle with your breath?
Oh, don't worry about it. Let them blow it out. It doesn't matter. It's a very Tibetan thing. And it's a really kind of pure approach to really valuing every part of ourselves, that you wouldn't misuse the breath, but sweetheart, let them blow out the candle. Come on. But have them make a wish so to make it beneficial. Make it beneficial. Okay. You know, think I'm blowing out all my anger. I'm blowing out all the rubbish in the world. I'm blowing out all the suffering. Then it's a marvelous action, Rachel.
I love it. Thank you so much, Venerable. Appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Venerable?
Yes.
It's Sheil. I have a question. Every time I hear the word karma, it scares me. Like
Well, Sheil, you've got so many fears. You know, I've noticed that with you. So many things make you afraid. You're being ridiculous. You're a big girl, Sheil. You're a big girl, darling. You're not 5. You're a big girl, and you can have the courage to listen to anything and look into the meaning of it before you jump and have a panic attack. You have to develop some courage.
Like, I guess
Sheil,
Yeah.
that is my answer to you.
Okay.
Thank you. Next question, please. Any other question? Nothing.
There's nothing in the chat, Venerable.
Okay. All right. We've got 15 more minutes. Maybe we can cut it short. There's enough food for thought for 45 minutes. What do you think? Huh?
Venerable Robina,
What?
then I'll ask another question
Go on then.
because I have them, but I don't want to take up time that other people.
Joanne, come on. It's everybody's questions are helpful for everybody, Joanne. Come on.
Okay, so because you brought it up a little bit and I've been thinking about it, the whole issue of guilt, that when you started talking about death and that we have sadness, but other feelings too, and one maybe being guilt. So if you begin to listen to what you say to people and then recognize why you want to say it because you have an attachment for them to be a certain way, and if they're not that way, then maybe you say something that you wish you hadn't said, and then you have guilt. So that guilt, what is that? What to do with the guilt?
Okay. All the delusions, all the neuroses, all the anger, attachment. This is the crucial point. They're all voices of the unhappy neurotic concrete, the belief in an unhappy concrete I. And they all exaggerate. Their function is to exaggerate, to grasp at, to see as solid. So attachment, which runs the show, is this emotional hunger that's always wanting something more. And then when it finds what it wants, it exaggerates its deliciousness and then tries to get it. And then when it doesn't get it or gets it and then it changes, then aversion arises, which is anger. These are the two fundamental ones that we run between 1,000 times a day. So, and they're both voices of this neurotic I. Now, anger, if you're mad at somebody, they do a certain action that isn't what your attachment wants. And you say, you did this and you did that. And then look at your conclusion and you're a bad person. So what we do is a person does a naughty action, another person, and then we exaggerate the action. And then we paint the whole person with that brush, don't we? Like that boyfriend who cheated on you, you forget all about the 27 years when he was kind and loving, and then one day he cheats on you, and forevermore, all you see is this cheating boyfriend. You paint the picture of a cheating boyfriend. That's what anger does. And so guilt is exactly the same as that, except you are the object. I did this and I did that, and you paint the whole of you by those naughty actions, and then you say, and I am a bad person. So we run to this automatically. And why this one for ourselves in particular is because of attachment. And here, the deepest attachment that it's relating to is the attachment to be seen as a good girl, the attachment to being approved of, the attachment to be liked. This is the deepest attachment of all. It's the closest to ego we can get. It's the most primordial attachment. So every time you do something naughty, like you break the cup, immediately we get guilty because we've programmed in us, mummy says you shouldn't break cups. Or if you're a naughty girl, if you've been very strictly religious, then you're guilty because God has seen you're going to punish you. So we have this guilt. It's always in reference to other people judging us as being naughty. And then we think we're naughty. And then we get all depressed and ridiculous. How does that sound?
Yeah.
It's very instinctive. It's a function of ego grasping. When we've realized emptiness, we won't have it. It'll be gone. We won't have this neurotic, ridiculous sense of a self who's naughty. And the guilt is, I'm naughty. I did this bad thing. We judge ourselves as naughty, but it's added to other people. All the assumptions we have about what I'm supposed to do. We've internalized mummy and daddy and grandma and grandpa and God and the police and the government. We're full of all these shoulds. And then as soon as we do something naughty, we're assuming we're going to get judged and not approved of. And that's unbearable to us because the deepest attachment is to be seen as a good girl. You understand? Did you recognize that?
Yes, I recognize that.
Very instinctive within us, very deep. So we've got to look at our minds like a hawk every second, and unpack it.
So that's the fix, is to just be the awareness, to continually make the effort to have the awareness of where it's
That's the
coming.
first step. That's the first step. Awareness of it happening is the first step, and then you have to change it, argue with it, deconstruct it, don't believe it. You have to pack, not just look at it. You need awareness to look in your garden to distinguish the weed from the herb, don't you? But you don't just be aware of there's a weed and there's a herb. What are you going to do about it? That's the real point. Awareness is the first step, and analysis of it is the next step. And then what will I do about it? The conclusion is, what's the action? That is to change. To argue with those misconceptions. They're very instinctive misconceptions, but argue with them. For example, how do you argue with attachment to being approved of? What has approval got to do with who I am? Other people's opinion about who I am can be useful, but to crave other people's approval in order for me to think I'm a valid person, that's sick. And that's how we all are, the deepest attachment of all. So you argue with it. I am who I am. I do what I do, and I'm the boss of who I am. Whether people like it or not is not relevant. That's how you argue with that one. And then we begin to have the courage to be driven by what we know is right, which is good ethics, not to be approved of by as a nice person. Most of us are stuck in that, and we become paralyzed and we go crazy. And so we do all the dumb things because we're watching like a hawk. Even strangers, we need their approval. We can't even bear strangers to not like us. It's so primordial. It's the deepest attachment possible. In other words, what I am has got nothing to do with what a person thinks I am. If they're a wise person, good, you learn from it. But it's coming from their attachment. So we all live in this nightmare, you know. This is the deepest attachment of all. They say the yogis in the mountains who've given up every attachment possible, but they're still thinking about what the people in the village are thinking about them. It's the deepest one to go. And guilt is very much rooted in that one. But basically guilt is anger, and you're the object of it. I'm bad. Do you understand?
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much for spending so much time on that. That's very.
All of us, this is how we're all the same. We're all variations of these recipes, you know. So I think we can finish. We're going to finish. Just think, just for a second, just contemplate and think, okay, but you've got like 55 minutes, 56 minutes, 53, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. All these thoughts. I'm saying these thoughts directly from Buddhist teachings. I'm saying them in my own words, from my own experience, trying to understand it, trying to do the job myself. And we can see we identify with each other. We're so similar, you know, we've got all these different ways. And the thing is, the more we understand our own mind, the more we understand others, the more we can help. That's the key to success. So we just think when we never give up, looking into our minds, understanding ourselves, seeing our marvelous potential, having courage, like I said to Sheil, be brave, don't be afraid of things, look into it, unpack it, analyze it. There's nothing to be afraid of, anything. Have courage and never give up, you know. Jang Trub Sem Chok Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam, Ke Guchi, Ke Panyampa, Me Payang, Gong Ne Gong Du, Hoba Shok. Thank you, sweethearts. Everybody. Much love. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, everybody. Elena.